Hi everyone, it's Jerry. I have an excellent game to share with you from round 5 of the 2025 Tata Steel Masters. On the white end, Jorden van Foreest, playing against Nordirbek Abdusattorov. All right, the opening we have here, Caro-Kann advance. I have a huge calculation test for you. The pop quiz I share, if you're going to get it correct, you will need to accurately calculate several moves in advance. So we play with bishop f5, c4, and now this bishop b4 move. You really need to know what you're doing, I would say, before playing bishop to b4. Black's plan here, follow up with knight to e7. This is how he's going to complete development and work around this invasive e5 pawn. We don't have that f6 square for the king knight. You really need to be careful in playing in this way. Why do I say this? It's because this is Black's good bishop. This is not necessarily played with the intention to trade it for the knight. It is not as if Black would be saddling White with permanent doubled c-pawns. They will naturally undouble because of this tension between d5 and c4. In playing bishop to b4, Black is kind of saying he's okay giving White a significant space advantage on the queen side. We'll see this soon enough, but first it's knight e2. Knight e7 is played here. If you take on c4, there's knight g3, targeting the bishop, ready to recapture the pawn. It's knight e7 here. In comes a3, bishop a5, b4, bishop c7. So not every day you see this fancy maneuver. There you are, or here we are here with a significant space advantage for White on the queen side. And it's not just the queen side. Follow up here, knight g3. In comes h4. Bishop ready to be squashed. Some room for it. Kicked back to h7. Queen g4. You can't castle to defend the pawn. You're going to get crushed. It's rook g8. No castles for Black. Now, the follow-up from here is bishop e2. Here's a question I had in going through this game. I wondered about the following. What if White played a different move? After bishop e7 in the game, Black takes on c4, and Black has a square, at least, to work with here. This d5 square opens up for a piece. I wondered about the following, though. What would Black have up his sleeve exactly if c5 was played? Now, let's just take stock of this position. There is a significant space advantage for White. Keep in mind, not a single piece or pawn has been exchanged. And if we just do some counting, looking at open squares on ranks 2, 3, and 4 from Black's perspective, so these are all the squares that are open, but we could eliminate some of these because we have White pawns controlling many of these squares. These are really the only open squares available to Black. We're looking at what? 5. Compare that to White's second, third, and fourth ranks. Where do we stand here? 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. Let's get rid of these two since this pawn controls it. We're looking at a 14 for White versus 5 for Black. That is significant. Look at the difference between the queens. Where would Black play? Like, what do you do to free your position here? Let's say you make a couple developing moves. Where do you go from here? Where are your pawn breaks? These are the pawn breaks for Black. Majority of them are not good. You play g6. That's going to spring the rook to life. You're asking to just lose the h-pawn at some point. You play a5. It already says b5. White is winning. f6, first of all, you're going to get crushed with queen takes e6. Forget about that. f6 will almost certainly be met with f4. And then where do you go from there? b6 apparently seems to be the only way to create a crack in this position, to open things up slightly for Black. But even with this b6 move, This bishop could even think about playing to a6. And then this square. Maybe the b file opens up, something like this. Is black prepared to have this position on board, where the king is officially stuck in the center? Both rooks have made a move like this. Okay. Risky to play in this way to gift white this significant space advantage. These are really difficult pawns to work around. All right. As it plays out in this game, we do not see this c5 advance. It's bishop to e2. We get a capture in there on c4. Knight d7, castles, knight f5, bishop e3, queen e7 is played here. Taking the bishop or the knight, in both cases the pawn, will be recapturing, and white will have a file to work with. It's queen e7, and from here we see b5. So this actually helps black, this b5 move. It's helping black in what way? Well, for as long as this structure is maintained, it does a good job in controlling two minor pieces. After b5, we're going to see this c5 advance, and that undermines white's center, and e5 becomes a problem, eventually drops off in this game. Now, how the computer wants to play it here, it's looking at queen f3, maybe next up b5, chop or a push. There's a problem. There'd be a problem here on b7. This is what it's looking at. Queen f3, castles, and then it's saying exchange knights, put this rook here. Next up, in this opposite sides castles game, it's looking at g6. There's even a flashy bishop a6 move here. Take the bishop, queen takes c6 is winning. It's looking at these moves here. Knight b8, bishop coming back to defend g2. And just a little bit later, it wants to go for this b5 advance, only after putting this rook opposite the king. Now, how it plays out in this game, we see this b5 break. The response is c5, undermining e5. We get the knight exchange now. Queen f3, castles, just barely there, holding things together on the light squares. Now, flashy follow-up, knight d5 is played here. Rook f to c1 is one of the top moves. White goes in for this knight drop. Pawn takes knight, got to get rid of it. Bishop takes pawn. And now there's a problem here on b7 and f5. In the game, top move is played, king to b8. You cannot save the bishop. If you try to save the bishop here, how it plays out, king b8, and then queen takes bishop. If you try to save the bishop, you're going to get mated. Chop, bishop a6, and how are you stopping queen b7 mate? Silly move, take the bishop, no stopping queen b7 next, mate. So there's no time to hang on to the bishop here. King b8. Follow-up now is queen takes bishop. If white tries bishop takes pawn here, the timing will not be right, because black would have this capture on d4. And this opens up an important square c5. So if you try bishop a6 here, knight c5 is there covering the important b7 square, defending the mate. So just looking at it like this, black is up the knight in this position and ready to even win another piece. So you must, as white here, meet king b8 with queen takes bishop, knight takes e5, taking advantage of the unprotected bishop. Black has weathered the storm. Black is for choice here. Ballpark minus 0.6. No open line directly towards the king. There's a problem here on e5. 3 attackers, only 1 defender. Defended here with f4. Perfect control over the d file, has this passed pawn. This point is ready to collapse. It's in a pin, f6 is nearby. Possible issue here on e3. Black is in the driver's seat, has weathered the storm, has worked his way through these complications after knight d5. Follow up, queen e4, f6, a4. The best try, best move. Computer's eyes looking for some pawn break, crack open a file. Chop on e5, keep pushing, and we can't take here. Queen is unprotected. Top move coming in, queen e8. Now she's defended. Now this is an idea. Maybe this, maybe that. Follow up from here is b6. Now, that's probably the best practical try. Computers point out queen c4 in this line right here, which is not really appealing at all for humans. Black is completely consolidated, not really the way to play. So this really is the best try, what white does in the game, meeting queen e8. He goes with b6. He's giving up a pawn, but he's getting this open file. Follow up, capture on e5, bishop returns, bishop f4, and from here we have rook to d4. This pawn is poison. If bishop takes pawn, there's rook f to e1, and white wins, throwing black in a pin there. So what do we have in the game? It is rook d4, queen e2, pop quiz. How would you continue here? Feel free to pause the video. All right, as mentioned at the start, this is a very lengthy continuation here. A lot of calculation required before pulling off this next move. How much calculation exactly? We're talking about 20 ply, 10 full moves. It kicks off with rook takes bishop. Rook takes rook, queen takes e5. Now, there's a couple ways this can go from here. In the game, queen a2 is the try. How would things play out if this rook goes to a4? Actually, before I even touch on that, here's the basic one to first point out. If you exchange queens, we're going to get the rook back and be winning. The rook and pawn ending up the two healthy connected passed pawns. What would happen if white, rather than the move in the game, queen a2, doubled up here on the a file with the rooks? No time to take the queen. There's a mate with one threat. Here's how black can continue. This is the winning idea. Queen h2 check. Two options. If the king goes to f2, the bishop lands the check. Good news for the king. We've parried the mate with one threat by inserting the check. Options from here, king here, mate. King stepping up to these two. Let's say he doesn't play to the same file as the queen just yet. So he goes to f3. Rook enters the scene. You go here, checkmate. If you go here, we're going to win the queen. What about here? Well, we still go here. The rook can block, but we're not done yet. Check out this move, queen h4. Now what? If you go here, it's mate. And any other square, the queen is able to interact with the pawn. She's coordinated beautifully with these two pawns. And what that means is that she'll be able to pick up the rook shortly. So for instance, king d3 here, check. Next up, we take the rook. And notice at the end of that line, white has a check right here on e8, but after the king steps up, there is no perpetual. There's no follow-up check. The black queen covers the white queen check on a4 in that position. What other route can white take here after this queen h2 check? Let's say he goes to f1. This is actually a very tricky line right here after king to f1. Rook f8 may be tempting. Apparently that's only a draw. The winning way here is with queen h1 check. And now a rook check. And then from here, we have rook e8 check. Keep in mind this position right here after the check. There's no time in this position here. There's no time to take the queen. You're getting mated. Queen takes rook. That's not working. This rook is going to fall. The only winning move here for black is the following. This is really tricky stuff. c4 check. If rook takes pawn, there's rook d8 check. And then we're ready to scoop up that rook next. And if king takes pawn, there's queen h4 check. Now where do you go? If the king returns here, still no time to take the queen. You're going to get mated. Queen d8 is an only move. If the rook blocks, you take the rook, and then the queen, black is winning. And if king c4 here, you ready for this next move? b5 check. This is wild. This is really wild stuff. This is opening up a square for the king, putting the king on a more vulnerable square. After king takes pawn, finally, now we're ready to take the queen, right? Not yet. You would still be getting mated with check and checkmate. The king assists in that mate in such a line. Queen d5 first in this position, and next up, you're ready to take that queen. That's a really tricky line, I must say. This one here, where the queen goes first to this h1 square, king f1, knowing that this is not going to win, and to be able to spot these follow-up c4 and maybe even b5 moves, that's some, you really have to have your calculation cap on for that one. Now, we don't see in this game that battery formed, the rook battery on the A file. It's queen a2 check, or queen a2 battery in this one. Queen e3 check is the follow-up in this game. If the king moves, bishop takes rook is there. There's no problem of the mate. We have the c7 square. So the rook goes into a self pin. Bishop g3, piling up on that pinned rook. And now we have a string of 7 consecutive checks. Queen a8, a5, a7, a4, a6. Only one move here for black. King has to step in the center. He had to see this position before capturing that bishop. He had to see that in this position he was okay in the event of queen b7, the move in the game, queen a7, and rook d1. What would happen if rook d1 was played here? King steps over, no problem. Can't take the rook. Queen takes rook. Queen f1 would be mate. Also queen a1 check, no problem. There's rook d4 to block. No follow-up rook e1 in that position because you could take the rook with check and then win the other rook. Anything else? Well, what about queen a2 check in this position? No problem. King here, follow-up check. We have the block. Eventually the checks will run out and black will have to, white will have to expend a tempo to address this threat on f2. So what is tried after the king is planted here on d5? Queen b7 check, king c4, queen f7 check, and now rook d5. That's the only winning move in this position. If black tried something else, something other than rook d5, for instance, king b4, hang on, the tables would immediately turn. White would be winning with rook b1. You can't go to the rook file. You're going to get mated. And if you step up here, you're still going to get mated. And here's one way that will happen. Check this out. How painful is that? The rook here, the king, I should say, sandwiched between the queen and bishop for mate. So proceed with caution. No king move in this position. Important to go into a self pin. 2 pins here. Queen, functioning like a queen. Aggressive. Defensive. There's no follow-up check on c1. White has to now babysit f2. Finally, after weathering 7 consecutive checks, we see rook a2. We take the rook and then centralize the queen. She is perfect here, keeping the pin, watching a base point. Another check. Get the king out of a pin, and slowly black can improve. He targets g2 from here. This is, in fact, the final move of the game. White now resigns. There's no good follow-up. The checks are all covered. Rook f4, there's c4. Rook b1, there's rook b2. And I played around with some other move. Keep in mind, black has some tricks up his sleeve. For instance, rook c1, for whatever the reason. You could take on g2, follow up, queen g5 check, taking out the rook. There is no perpetual check here. These pawns provide a lot of security for the king against these perpetual check ideas. So this one only goes as far as rook d2 and white resigns. So very deep calculation there by Nordirbek. Before pulling off that rook captures bishop, he had to see a good 10 moves in advance. Did you happen to calculate that one correctly? Okay. Feel free, as usual, to leave any feedback to this video in the comment section below. I hope you enjoyed it and maybe took a thing or two away. That's all for now. Take care.